Paul, hold on a second, because we've got some breaking news from the New York Times. And joining us now by phone is a reporter who's broken that news, New York Times Washington correspondent Michael Schmidt. So, Michael, what do you know?
We know that in recent weeks, the Justice Department reached out to former Vice President Pence's representatives because they want to question him in connection with the January 6th investigation into Trump. This was the first outreach that came from the department to the Pence side. Pence has not been subpoenaed yet, but it is sort of the first step in trying to turn Pence into a witness against Trump in that investigation. This could take a long time to play out. Trump has tried to invoke and use executive privilege to slow and stop former White House officials from testifying against him. That is probably something he would try to do here. He has not been successful in stopping that so far, among other aides, but he has been able to slow the process. Pence is said to be considering the request from the department looking at it differently than the congressional investigations of January 6th, which he said in interviews last week for his book that he does not have Congress does not have a right to his testimony. So he has rejected the overtures from the January 6th committee. It's much harder to reject the overtures from something like a criminal investigation where they could subpoena him. So that's sort of where it stands. Obviously, Pence as a witness against Trump would be yet another remarkable twist in the remarkableness of all of the Trump investigations that we've seen in the past few years.
Do we know if Jack Smith has had anything to do with this, or if he's signed off on this since he's now in charge?
This happened before the announcement of Jack Smith. The outreach to the Pence side came from Thomas Windham, one of the lead investigators on the January 6th investigation. As we now know, that investigation and the Mar-a-Lago documents investigation are under Jack Smith, but this happened before the appointment. Garland made a point, the Attorney General made a point last week when he was announcing the special counsel that this was not going to be delaying anything in the investigation. The process of getting Pence's testimony will take a long time. Pence is being represented in this by Emmett Flood. He's a veteran Washington attorney. He actually worked in the Trump White House as the lead lawyer dealing with the Mueller investigation. He now represents a bunch of different former White House officials caught up in these Trump investigations, and he's Pence's new lawyer.
Hasn't he said recently, I think it was an interview with Chuck Todd, former Vice President Pence has said that he believes that DOJ was overstepping when they were investigating the documents being held at Mar-a-Lago, that he thought there were other ways to get the documents back, even though Chuck pushed on that and said they tried quite a bit. Do we know anything about, since he feels not kindly toward this investigation, can you talk more about why he would be more willing to talk to the FBI or wouldn't try to stonewall it?
Well, it's much harder to stonewall the FBI and the Justice Department than it is as a former vice president to put up a fight with Congress. If he, Congress thinks very highly of its subpoenas, but Pence, they never subpoenaed Pence to testify. They made some overtures to him. He said he wasn't interested in that. It would be much more difficult for him to be adversarial to the Justice Department in an ongoing investigation. He could try and fight it. The chances of him prevailing would probably be pretty low. So it's just a different dynamic when dealing with the Justice Department than dealing with Congress.
Here is what he said to Chuck. I've got to tell you, going to the last resort of executing a search warrant against a former president of the United States, I think sent the wrong message. Chuck pushed back and he said, trust me, they didn't do everything they could have done. to avoid this incredibly divisive step. Again, we do know from the way that the FBI has laid this out in the court documents that they did take a number of steps to try to get these documents back, and then had surveillance footage showing that stuff was moved even after they'd subpoenaed the documents from Mar-a-Lago. Mike, one final question to you. Just remind us, in case anyone needs reminding out there, what they might want to ask former Vice President Pence if they do get a chance to interview him.
Well, Mike Pence was the focus of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election, because it was Mike Pence that had to certify the Electoral College votes. And Donald Trump, working with the little-known conservative lawyer John Eastman, came up with this idea, which Eastman conceded to others was bogus, that Pence could take the decision of the election into his hands and basically decide which votes to count and which votes not to count. And the idea of those who stormed the Capitol was to hang Mike Pence. That's what they said out loud. So all the pressure from Trump was directed on Pence, where he wanted Pence to basically take the election into his hands and make a decision about who won. So Pence was the main pressure point that Trump was pushing on, including in the Oval Office, in a dramatic showdown with Pence in the days leading up to January 6th.
And just to be abundantly clear, they want to talk to him about January 6th. I was talking about his pushback on the documents case. You know, all of these things seem to fold into each other as time goes on, and they're all related to Donald Trump's refusal to let go of the office of the White House. So to be clear, this would be about January 6th, and it seems not about the documents. Mike Schmidt, thank you so much for jumping on the phone and getting us your reporting. We do appreciate it.